Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk about responsibility because I think something that's going on a lot is that we like to put the problem out there. And when we do that, it stops being something that we're responsible for and becomes something that the responsibility belongs to a amorphous group. And I think that we need to bring things really back to human-sized. So somebody said recently, the antidote to globalism is nationalism. And I had a problem with that because that puts the responsibility out there. Somebody ought to do something about that
Big
idea.
amorphous group.
Yes. And actually, the antidote to globalism is family. And that brings it back to us and our relationships with each other.
Now, a lot of people would come back and say, no, it's the individual. So why the family? Why not the individual?
You can't have the individual because we don't exist in a vacuum.
It kind of goes back to that idea we've talked about recently that it's all about relationships. It's not about an individual object. So it's not about us individually. Humans have never existed as individuals in nature. We've always been part of a group. And so you're going back to the fundamental group, which is the family.
The building block of society. If we take that responsibility for ourselves, the self-responsibility, this is something I go on about a lot, but I really think the self-responsibility, the self-discipline, that self-control, we've seen it in the last few weeks with the All Blacks. The thing that I think really makes them different from other teams is that self-responsibility. When one of the players missed, I think it was curfew he missed, and he got suspended by the coach from the next game, a very important game, and he was an important player. But they said, no, he's not going to play. And everybody accepted that as fair, including the player himself. Look, I let myself down, and he took self-responsibility. And I think that the All Blacks display a great amount of self-discipline,
yes,
self-control, and that is what makes them a great team.
I've heard a similar story coming from a military background where someone was late back to camp and they were asked, why are you late back? And there was trying to explain, this happened, that happened. And the sergeant on duty wasn't interested because what he really wanted to know is, did you have a valid reason or an invalid reason? Now, the guy that was coming back late had all sorts of excuses, but at the end, they were just excuses. And he was looking at the reasons and was saying, but I couldn't help it. At the end of the day, it's not about whether you could help it or not. It's about whether you were late or not and not making the excuse. But you're right, as a society, we
don't externalize the issues of society. We
externalize blame. It's always someone else's fault.
And as long as we're doing that, we're not going to have any real movement on our society getting better.
Part of the problem is that we outsource. Where do we outsource it to? It ends up inevitably in the government sphere. So you could look at all sorts of policy areas or department areas and say that's people outsourcing. So we've got a huge healthcare system. That's because we've outsourced responsibility for our own health.
We recently had a situation with a child having fever, and there was a discussion about whether or not to go to the emergency room. But the question came, what will happen if we go to the emergency room?
Yes.
What are they going to do? Something that we can't do? What's going to happen is they are going to nurse her through the fever, because we can do that nursing at home. But what will happen for us is that the responsibility for the decisions will transfer to the doctors.
Yes. So you're abrogating your responsibility as a parent by sloughing that off onto the medical establishment.
So if anything happens, we're not responsible. It makes it easier for us.
Okay, so here's another area where we've abrogated responsibility. Education. We send our children off to school and then we complain that we don't like what's being taught in the schools, but
we need to actually be proactive in that. A lot of people say, well, I can't homeschool, I can't afford to. And homeschooling does cost you as far as your lifestyle goes.
Yes.
You're not going to live the same sort of lifestyle as when your kids are in school. But at the same time, we need to recognise that that's still a choice of ours.
Yes.
We are sending our kids to school, and therefore we need to, it's not just a resign responsibility, we need to be proactive in knowing what's going on there and being on the school boards and pushing back against the extreme gender ideology that's being taught, and actually pushing for the purpose of schooling, which is education. And education is not social conditioning, it's about the reading and the writing and the maths and the learning history and
Yes.
the actual education.
So even if your children are going to school, you can still be having, a big one is family dinners,
Yes.
and having the discussions around the family dinners where you can actually impart or inculcate stories and therefore values.
Yes.
You can be reading to your children,
Yes.
which is inculcating stories and values. So there are other ways in which you can counteract some of the indoctrination which is going on in the school.
And we need to accept responsibility that we might send our kids to school for the education component, but that's not their life education. That should only be academics.
Yes.
And so
Values should still come from the home.
and from the family.
And from the family.
And so I think that this is once again taking the responsibility. We actually need to go, what am I going to do about this?
What about Milton Friedman? He used to talk about families, but then when you pushed him on it, he'd actually change his definition and talk about households. So there's a slight difference there in that. Family assumes a kinship relationship. Households doesn't necessarily. So there will be people listening to us who maybe they don't quite have the same traditional family relationships, but they can still do the sorts of activities that we're talking about and take back control within their household.
I would say it's about the self-responsibility, and that is about relationship, because you can be in a household like a flat and have no relationship. You can be in a household like a flat with no kinship relationships, but still relationships going on. So
Yes.
it's about actually the relationships, and then that's about the responsibility and the responsibility and accountability that we have with each other. So somebody whose son has got a new girlfriend, and he said, "Oh, I don't know if she's my girlfriend," and she said, "No, you asked her out. She's your girlfriend. I'm not having you messing her around like this. We're not going
Yes.
there." And that is an accountability that he
Yes.
has, and the relationship there between the two of them, that she can say to him, "Do you know what? This is not okay." And when she is taking that responsibility to hold him accountable, and he's taking the responsibility of being held accountable by that relationship, then we don't need interference from the higher ups.
But something that I find of great importance, because we have children and I want to be able to, see our children form families sometime in the future. But how do they do that if there aren't other people or other young people that are responsible and have family as a priority? So in that respect, this is kind of expanding out into the greater community. We actually have a responsibility to our wider community to form stable, successful families, because if we have a successful family, that's no good if there's no one else for our children.
Well, I would say that's where it's beneficial to us to encourage other families, and that's where the wider community comes in, because you have the family and then you have the community, and so that's where the community comes in.
Yes.
In that you're having people of similar values to you. Now, the communities might be more geographically more spread out than they used to be, but we're still looking for people of similar values to create our wider community. And so our community includes people who have a strong family ethic and values system. So to bring it back, it's about this responsibility. And I would say that self-responsibility, self-control, and self-discipline and family is the antidote to the problems that we're seeing in the world around us. That comes back to self-control, really, because...
And responsibility. And it's not a case of people have tried this and it's been found wanting. It's that people find responsibility difficult and avoid it.
Yes.
It's an avoidance behaviour.
Because we like to make our lives easier.
Is there an element of we've got away with it over the last 50, 60, 70 years because life has been good, but now we actually need to smarten up because what we could get away with before we can't get away with now?
I think we have been living off the moral capital of previous generation, and we've just about spent up. And
Yes.
this is what the empty bank account of morality looks like.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming,
But we have squandered it.
it.
And so now we're going to have to start rebuilding and reinvesting in moral capital.
I see it a lot with, discussions that I've had recently with friends and with the industry that I work in. There's actually a lot of corruption in our society that we've just had our blinkers on and we've just said, we're not seeing it, don't see it, can't see it. But in actual fact, that's a sign of the decay of our society as well. I guess where I'm coming from with this is, again, it's that wider community. Yes, we need to be responsible with our families, but we need to be responsible in our business dealings and in our civic dealings as well.
And that is reinvesting in our moral capital, being self-responsible, self-disciplined and self-controlled individuals. Each person is making a difference, but it comes back to ourselves.
It starts with us.
The other thing is that we've had this attitude in our culture of, if you can get away with it, that's all fine. And so I have this discussion with my teenager of, no, you still behave with standards because of who it makes you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you can get away with it, and it doesn't matter what other people are getting away with.
Yeah.
We still maintain the standards because of who we are and who it makes us.
And if you're upset when you get caught out, are you upset because you got caught out or because you realise that you're not perfect? Usually people are upset because they got caught out, not because they've realised that they're imperfect.
Well, we have a difficulty in with admitting guilt and accepting blame. And that's another thing that is a requirement to be able to reinvest in moral capital, is that we need to be able to go, actually, I did something wrong there.
How does reinvesting in yourself play into this? Because there's an element of, if you never admit guilt, you can't go through the process of self-correction and becoming a better person.
Absolutely.
That you kind of end up stagnating in this juvenile or childish state.
Well, we actually applaud stagnation in the juvenile or childish state because we want to grow old disgracefully.
And we call it being true to ourselves.
And the suggestion that you should never change. You're born this way. This is how you should behave. This is who you are. And I actually think we can always be better, and we should always strive to be better.
So there's another area where we need to be taking responsibility for our own growth through life.
Yes.
Adulting. We need to
successfully
adult.
Well, I think it's Dave Rubin that talks about this, and he says that people want grown-ups, and so it doesn't matter the age that you are, they're drawn to you if you're fine with being a grown-up. And he's discovered this over the course of his life, that even when he was younger, people would come to him as a grown-up. And he actually said it was something that he thought that the Queen had. Why people were drawn to the Queen was because she was okay with being a grown-up.
Yes.
And we actually want that in life. We need that. But I think that we should all strive towards being okay with growing up, taking responsibility, and successfully adulting.
What a great way to end.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.